So God gave me a dream last week, a few nights ago, some nights ago actually, and it was a disturbing one. And I knew it was from him because of what he told me afterwards. In the dream, for some reason I was with my mom and we were driving out of like a previous dream. I can't even remember what that dream was about, but we came out of it and drove into a school hallway. And as we're driving through, and while we're driving through, you know how some things like don't make sense in dreams? That's one of those aspects of this, is that we were in the car like driving through this school hallway. Don't know if it was a middle school or a high school, but it was definitely a school. So we're going through it, and we just hear gunshots just going off, like bah, 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 bah. It's going crazy, right? There's a series of like murders happening, like homicides, legit dudes with guns just shooting men. And we pass by a group of black men. They're all black. These black men, or black kids rather, and they're busy shooting. He's shooting at a guy who's already dead and on the ground. Blood is spilling out of his skull. And he's bah, 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 bah. But he had manners though, because as soon as he saw me and my mom, he stopped. He was like, oh yeah, you guys go ahead. We passed by. Goes back to shooting the guy. Bah, 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 bah. That was the first group that we passed, and then we passed another group, and then we passed a group that was actually like running across, and like the bullets were flying, but none of it all missed us. And they had manners too. They stopped, they put their guns down, let us pass, and then bah, 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 went back to shooting one another. It was so dark, demonic, and just outright evil. The presence was just so I remember it arresting me in that moment, and it just felt so hopeless. As we were walking out of the hallway and out of the school, then there was a superintendent that we passed by. And you would think the superintendent would be moved by what's happening, you know, would be trying to do something, but she was actually standing there just smiling. And then she walks out a little bit before us, and there's like news reporters. This is how we know, I knew that it was Chicago, because of the news reporters, and like the word Chicago came up as she was getting hounded by these news reporters, and she was fleeing the scene, like I don't know, maybe she was caught up in a scandal or something. But I do remember this, like she didn't know the answer to something that was so obvious, like something like not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, but she didn't know the answer to something that was regarding like a language. Like, oh, you didn't know this about this? And then the reporters are like, ah! And even the guys who were shooting, they like stopped shooting, and they were actually the ones who were like, yo, you don't know this? It was the weirdest dream, but it was devastating at the same time. And then I woke up. And then shortly after, I got a brief glimpse, like a vision of a teacher having sex with a student. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but it was just a flash. But use your imagination with that one. And so after that, I was like, God, was this from you? And if it is from you, what do you want me to do about it? And then immediately I heard, go tell my people. Or tell my people, rather. That's what he said. He said, tell my people. Well, I was like, okay, bet, got you. I'll let them know. Then it came down to like actually thinking about it. Like, okay, I'm going to be letting these people know, but God, I want to corroborate it. Like, I want to have like some evidence, like something that will prove that this is just not only a dream that you have given me, like, even though that should be something that, you know, people should take it and, you know, of course go to you about it, God. But also I just want to give them some things to substantiate this. And he was like, say less. And so had me Google Chicago public school sex. I was surprised by the first article that popped up. So the first article that I came across was by The Lion. The article here in The Lion is entitled, Hundreds of Cases of Sexually predatory behavior reported in Chicago public schools. It reads on to say, a report last week revealed a staggering number of alleged teacher-on-student sexual assaults at Chicago public schools. The Office of the Inspector General closed cases on over 600 reports of adult on student misconduct in 2022. 600. Having one is too many. But 600 cases? What's happening that we're having such an overwhelming amount of sexual assault cases? That's mind-blowing. A figure which is over 300 more than were closed in 2021. So that means that it was half that. So it was 300 in 2021. So a figure which is, yeah. So the report also says more than half of the allegations were substantiated. They had evidence to prove their cases. And 16 criminal cases were opened as a result. What? So only 16 criminal cases? So more than half. So 300 plus. Because there are 600 reports, right? So over 300 of those reports had evidence to prove their case. And only 16 actually came to court. And and then you have to think about this, guys, as well. There could be more than 600 cases, because a lot of, especially your age, kids, to have this happen to you at such a young age, a lot of them are probably ashamed, don't want to speak up, probably too caught up with this teacher and emotions, probably scared because they probably are under some type of threat. I wouldn't put it past that there's actually more unspoken cases, unfortunately. In a presentation to the Board of Education, the OIG detailed the types of reports they received. So here are the type of reports that they got. Out of these 600 reports, there are 81 sexual touching cases. So that means maybe groping the butt, fondling, or maybe touching a swipe, the boobs and stuff like that, hugging tightly, and maybe those type of touches, and maybe lingering and touch. Teachers should not be touching a student in that way, shape, or form. You shouldn't be touching students, period. I don't care if they got a piece of lint on them. Just be you got something right there. No, right. Move your hand down. And then even if they be just go grab it. No, I'm not grabbing nothing. I am not touching your shoulder. And have no restrictions. You gotta put restrictions on yourselves, guys. Anyway, not y'all, but these abusers. 81 sexual touching cases, 35 grooming cases. That is just, grooming means there's manipulation involved by the adult, because the adult is more experienced, they have more knowledge, they know what they're doing, they have an objective of, this is the type of role that I want you to see me as, this is the position in your life I want you to perceive me as, your friend, your mentor, your boyfriend, your school boyfriend, your pretend boyfriend, especially if there's no father in the home, I'm your daddy. They try to take the place as somebody's father and daddy, buy them gifts and stuff. I've had that happen to me, where this guy was trying to groom me. Was always talking about how, he has money to buy me stuff and all that stuff. And, he was in Hollywood, and I know it's not school, but he was grooming me. Trying to take that position as a protective father, when I had an issue with somebody on set, he was right there don't be doing that to my girl. And then what you want for Christmas? I got you. All these things. And you want them Jordans? I got you. What type of Jordans you want? Picking Jordan you want? I'm gonna invite you to my parties, and I'm gonna do this and do that. And then I think he even got a little bit jealous, because it was I forgot who it was, but they made a joke I'm saying that I'm that person's girl, that's my girl. No, she ain't your girl, that's mine. I overheard it. I was what the heck? That's grooming, okay? Buying gifts and trying to take that role as an uncle, or some authoritative figure, some a daddy or something. So 33 sexual abuse cases, 26 cases actually involving sexual acts. 25 in-person sexual comments. Face-to-face comments like, girl, you looking good. Like, dang, your breasts look good. Like, I don't know. Like, y'all know what they're saying here. And then 14 sexual electronic communication, so over social media and stuff. Like, they should have a rule that teachers should not follow students or vice versa on like social media. Just no that crosses the line. Not even my personal email, nothing. It's all taking place at school, okay? None of this after school stuff. No. There were also 8 reports regarding past sexual conduct in 243 cases categorized as concerning. Okay? And concerning meaning like leery, creepy behavior. This is by the teachers. They sound like basket cases, like mental, like creepy. You're just supposed to go up in there and teach them algebra and take your behind home. Why is you being creepy, bruh? Like, I imagine like maybe like creepy meaning like always looking at them. That's creepy. Like, I don't know why Mr. Smith keeps looking at me. Like, you know, he just, you know, like that's creepy behavior. That can definitely make a student uncomfortable. Maybe hanging out by the restrooms. There's so many variations of this creepy behavior that can make a student uncomfortable, but you as an adult should know, like, you have a brain that's well developed, more developed than these students, and you should be able to reason and figure out and know that maybe me staring at this student's boobies all day is wrong. I don't know exactly what that creepy behavior is, but that would definitely, I'm sure, fall into the category if we were to speak to these students. One of the worst cases reported, this would piss me off, y'all, was one in which a male teacher allegedly groomed and sexually assaulted a 17-year-old female student on 3 separate occasions. In a complaint, the student said she began to think of him as her friend and therapist. Grooming. She claims eventually he touched and groped her while hugging her, touching her thighs and buttocks under the pretext of removing lint from her clothing. I like the way you look in your jeans, she recalls a teacher saying to her. The student's claims were in part corroborated by text messages. Okay, she had text messages to prove that this dude was a creep and was sexually abusing her. And they had Snapchat records. And a student witnessed and overheard their conversations and knew that, you know, something going on between them. The teacher was charged with multiple counts of sexual assault, but get this, y'all, the jury acquitted him in November. Let God's judgment fall on every jury member and the teacher. In another case, a male junior ROT staff member was accused of having sex with a female high school student over the course of a year when she was 16 to 17. Absolutely disgusting. So the investigation reportedly revealed hundreds of text messages and calls between that staff member and the student, some of which were overtly sexual. I'm ready to F right now. I'm not going to be gentle either, is what the staff member reportedly texted to the student. He even allegedly threatened to kill the student and her family if they told on him. Boy. So I don't even know how these parents feel. Like, I'm sure they probably want to chop this man's penis off, okay? Do a Lorena Bobbitt. The problem has been so extensive that a sexual allegations unit, it's been so extensive that they had to bring in the sexual allegations unit that was formed in October 2018, and now it's grown, right? They had to bring them in to handle all of these sexual misconduct allegations per year. So in 2022, the sexual allegations unit closed more than 600 cases, so over 300 more than it closed in 2021, marking a period of significant progress for the unit. The next article it's pretty much reiterating what the Lion said. So this is the Guardian. The report also claimed many of the alleged abusers were working in the system despite accusations and being flagged with a do not hire label by district officials. So they hired people who the district officials said don't hire. It was labeled on like don't hire these people, and yet they hired them. And of course they'll probably be like, well, we have a shortage of staff members and we needed what, like, we have to screw that. We have to have our children's safety as priority. Like, when did we just fail and forget our priorities? You don't care about these students. If you are hiring because you're so desperate, you're hiring people who are labeled as do not hire. And I don't even care. Then some people probably want to like dive into it and like be like, well, why do they have a do not hire? Because maybe they like stole bubble gum and they have a do not hire label. I don't give a dag if you stole bubble gum, you stole something from the park. Like, I don't care. You stole something. If you stole a piece of bubble gum from the store, who's to say that you won't steal somebody's virginity? Go over and raping somebody. Like, it starts off small, but it gets big if it goes unchecked. Whoever wants to argue that point of like, okay, then we have to look at, you know, whoever these people are who are in charge of bringing these people. What is it, the principal who hires these the staff members? Like, oh, we were in dire need of like staff members, and you know, we looked into their background check and we just saw that they just had a little petty crime, and I'm sure that's what they justify their hiring of this employee for. But like, no, you have to have standards. Like, these are kids, these are other people's lives. The childhood is what shapes us. Like, our experiences, a lot of the times the issues and who we are today stem back from childhood. For instance, when I had anxiety and I was very nervous to speak up, it traced back to moments in my childhood of when I got teased, or when I did try speaking up, something happened. So that mentally carried with me. It may have been dormant for a minute, but it came up all of a sudden, you know, during my 20s and whatnot. Like, it all stems back to childhood. And so, and childhood includes, to me, high school. Like, we have to protect our children. These are children. 16, 17, 18-year-olds, younger. We have to have their safety, their mind protected at all costs. So what if you are short-staffed? I don't know, honestly, I'm not an expert, but that should always be your overhead factor. Like, no matter what, I'm making decisions because I'm truly trying to protect these kids. Does it protect these kids hiring this person, this, you know, guy who robbed some, like, I don't know, did some type of crime? Like, no, it doesn't protect. Like, it should always go back. Is this decision protecting my kids? Is this decision protecting my kids? If I'm speaking as like a principal or superintendent and whatnot, is this decision protecting my students, my kids? And if it's not, then trash that. Like, come up with something better. To me, it's simple, and I think that because you're dealing with people's lives, young, precious lives, it is simple. Don't try to make your way around it. Don't try to take the easy way out when it comes to children. Next up, I want to show you guys a news segment about what's happening in Chicago.
An audit of Chicago public schools finds widespread fraud and shocking sexual misconduct. The investigation by the Office of Inspector General focusing on the misuse of COVID relief funds and abuse of students.
So it's talking about
77% of the nearly $1.5
the COVID relief funds, y'all remember that?
Relief funds given to Chicago public schools were spent on employees' salaries and benefits, according to a 2022 Office of Inspector General report. The report finding schools and CPS departments were handing out atypical amounts of extra pay without proper documentation. The report says employees fraudulently clocked each other in and out of work. In one case, an employee received $150,000 in extra pay while he was fraudulently clocked in at school, but actually at a casino. In addition, the report found administrators at an elementary school deliberately miscoded students who were truant so that their absences wouldn't count against the school's attendance rate. And in other cases, as in years past, the report found some children of CPS employees were improperly signed up to receive free or reduced price meals. But perhaps the most shocking is the report's detailed summary of at least 20 sexual misconduct investigations involving students as young as elementary age. Complaints were filed against teachers, custodians, security guards, and school vendors. They included everything from being friends on Facebook to sexual acts on campus. In 2022, 450 cases were investigated by the Inspector General. Some resulted in firings and criminal charges. Others were unsubstantiated.
Unsubstantiated. Like, that means that they couldn't prove the case, but if, like, I don't know who initiated it. Maybe it was a child that spoke up. If a child spoke up, I'm automatically believing them. I'm automatically on their side. So I don't know about that. I think that they need to be investigated. Whoever is investigating this, the OIG, they need to be investigated, because, like, did you exhaust all options and all strategies, investigative strategies? Because to me, like, you even joking about a teacher touching you or sexual misconduct, like, that's enough for me, for my hackles to raise, and for me to be like, where he at or she at? We gonna get to the bottom of it. So as far as the violence that was in my dream, like the homicides, the shootings, and all that stuff, the only recent one that I found that was actually in school was the Benito Juarez shooting, where 2 people died and 2 people were hurt and injured. It happened in December last year. I believe that even though it's not like something that's active at the moment, but I mean, God gave me this dream, so the only way that I could make sense of it and surmise it as a warning or a strong indication that something is about to happen, but we as believers can prophesy against it and stop it and pray against it and intercede. So the enemy has something cooking up within these public schools, particularly in Chicago, regarding gun violence. We may not see it as rampant now, but we can stop it. So this interview that I'm about to show you guys took place 5 years ago, but the information in it, I think, is very prevalent and relevant to what we're talking about now.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kalila Harris with the Real News Network. Today I'm going to be interviewing Troy LaRaviere, who is a candidate for mayor in Chicago. Troy is also president of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association. Welcome, Troy.
Hey, thanks, Kalila. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking a bit about a recent report issued in June of 2018 from the Chicago Tribune about Chicago public schools and issues that have been surfaced around sexual assaults both not being reported and understaffing that has supported a number of egregious occurrences happening for children in Chicago public schools.
Following the explosive report by the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Public Schools issued a statement laying out plans to begin a process to audit their background check and investigative processes. They've already begun to take steps to address matters, including a recent announcement from Janice Jackson, Chicago Public Schools CEO, that 2 principals implicated in the report have been relieved of their duties, and of the creation of the new Office of Student Protections in Title IX.
So you as a candidate for the mayor of Chicago, and I probably gather to say as a concerned citizen, also wrote a blog post about these issues. Will you talk a little bit about the issues?
Sure. So what the Chicago Tribune found, first of all, was that Chicago public schools failed to protect students, and they failed to protect students in 5 different ways. First, they failed to conduct proper background checks. Second, or actually they failed to conduct background checks to the level of specificity and detail that was needed for the situation.
I mean, yeah,
Second,
you're dealing with
they
kids.
failed to conduct
It should
proper
be more
oversight
than
of schools
just
and their handling of sexual
computerized
assault
background
allegations.
check. He'll explain
Third,
it in a minute.
they failed to notify other districts if someone who was accused of sexual assault left CPS for another district. They failed to notify those districts. Fourth, and they failed to track these incidents appropriately. As a matter of fact, they failed to track them at all. And as a former CPS principal, I know CPS tracks everything that they care about because they're always speeding reports to principals about this piece of data or that piece of data or your trend and this or that. But they didn't track this all-important phenomenon. And fifth, what they found was that at the central office level, particularly at the law department, they had the law department investigate claims
and why
or accusations of
because
sexual harassment or assault or abuse with
that's
teachers
why
or
when you
students
have kids as your
or staff
priority,
to
you won't let these things slide
but
by
then the
and
law
slip through the
department would
cracks.
then in turn
No
take
way.
what they learned from that investigation and then use it against the child
And use it against the
when
child.
the child's family sued the district for their negligence. And
That's-
so all of those things were at a central.
That's crazy. That even law, like we all know law is corrupt, but it's insane. It's evil that they would use this evidence, this child even speaking up and providing, substantiating their case, and you're going to use that against them. Like, how dare it? Like, let God's judgment fall on every single person involved in Chicago public school sex scandal and all that. Like, it's evil. You see how the enemy is working? Like that, it's all spiritual. Like that is a spiritual matter, a spiritual thing. Anything that goes against God is evil. For anyone to think like, I'm not going to protect this child, I'm going to put my own desires or what have you ahead of this child, ahead of this, like your own greed and need to climb up the ladder at work. It's all just selfishness that's going on here and just evilness. Everybody's forgetting about the child, and it seems like that's a trend. Like that is something that is just, it's steadily happening where we're losing our values as a people, as believers as well. Like we're losing our values. That's why we have to pray. We have to pray. Like this is something that should anger you. Like this should incite righteous anger, because you're talking about kids being abused by adults who know better, and how a whole system is working against these children. We're in the end times. We're completely in the end times.
What they found was that staff did not live up to their mandated reporter requirement. In Illinois, and I imagine all across the United States, there are state laws on the books that say when you hear or when an allegation of sexual assault is made, you call the Department of Children and Family Services. And the different states around the country have their equivalent to that department and an equivalent rule. You have to call. And so what some principals decided to do was, in lieu of calling or before calling, investigate the claim themselves, which is understandable. You can understand that inclination. So let me look into this before I call to make sure, but that's not what the law requires. The law requires that you call DCFS immediately.
Right.
And so what that leads back to is a failure of proper oversight for the district to make sure that the staff, the administrators are properly trained in the details of how to handle a sexual assault allegation.
Right.
And so those are the things they found.
Thank you. Your blog talks about primarily funding for Chicago public schools and it being woefully understaffed, whereas in other districts in Chicago,
I know
for a
Rahm
school of
Emanuel,
around
when he
600
was in, he
students, you
closed
might have
down
60
50
staff members.
schools
But in Chicago,
in Chicago.
you have a school of 600 students with maybe 40 staff members. And it sounds like there are two separate
just-
issues that certainly.
You know, I mentioned that about Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, closing down 50 schools. It's just, it's a problem. It's a never-ending problem. Like, what is the principality over Chicago? And particularly over Chicago public schools. Like, what is going on? I remember coming across an article that said the reason why he shut down those schools because of low attendance and they performed extremely poorly. I mean, I think that those were the two main reasons why he shut down those schools. It's just problem begets problem begets problem. We're trying to solve it out of our own wisdom, man's wisdom, when it takes God's wisdom.
Is that two separate issues here? One around funding for staffing and one around leadership related to mindset and the practices that school staff and central office staff are taking. Will you talk a little bit about the distinction between the two and how you see those converge?
Absolutely. And so what people are talking about in Chicago in relationship to these allegations, and to the district's failure to protect students, they're talking about policy. And I agree with almost everything I've heard in terms of policy changes. What I have decided was build people's or raise people's consciousness about another change that's needed in order for the policy changes to work, and that's adequate staffing. As you mentioned, Chicago Public Schools is the most understaffed school district in the state of Illinois. We're ranked 857 out of 858 school districts in the ratio of students to certified staff.
Wow.
And so that means you have one person in many schools doing 6 people's jobs. And that same understaffing exists at the central office.
And the paycheck
so
ain't
let's
that
go back
good,
to
too.
those findings.
See, that's another problem.
Make the connection.
That us men, mankind cannot
CPS
solve.
conducts background checks, but it's a computerized system. It's kind of like a checkoff list. If they have a list of categories of offenses, if you have been found guilty of or convicted of, you cannot work for CPS. And so you either fit those categories or you don't. But what the Tribune found is that when you go into these convictions, you find that someone may have pleaded down from a much more
Right, that's why you can't
egregious
have computerized background checks. Y'all gotta go up in there and do mental evaluations and
may
whatnot.
have, in one case, the person violently pushed
I mean, of
someone
course,
down
that's
the
us
stairs
trying to
and
solve
almost
it
killed the person,
naturally
but got
in our own
pleaded it
wisdom,
down to
which
something
will
that
not
wasn't
solve
on
it at the
CPS's
root,
offenses. But if they had actually went in and saw what the person did, which was
It
not
does
up to
something.
the date, this is probably not someone you want working in school. But my point about staffing, if you're just doing a checklist, that's easy. If you need someone to go into each and every one of these offenses and look at the details of them, that means you need
You need manpower to
because
do
the
it.
background checks being done all of the time. And we have an administration in CPS under our mayor that has disinvested in staff, disinvested in schools.
Where would you prioritize resources to make sure that staffing was a central focus, particularly staffing that ensured schools were safe and supportive environments, both because the school leadership and school staff was being properly trained, and also because the number of people, both inside of the school buildings and at central office, can support a highly functioning school system? How would you reprioritize or change the way finances were spent in Chicago public schools?
And so we have this phenomenon in CPS where they actually complain about the need to pay teachers, for example. And I'll make the connection if you don't see it already. That they'll say if we didn't have to spend so much money on teachers, we could we could spend more on classroom expenses. What is the biggest classroom expense?
Teachers.
The teacher.
Yeah.
It's like
Classroom
saying that the biggest in terms of on the books as a principal, the biggest classroom expense, the thing you pay the most money for is staff. Right? It's the teacher salary. And so it's like saying that, the Washington Wizards could have a great basketball team if we didn't have to spend so much money on the player salaries we can make the Washington Wizards a great basketball team. That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make
whatsoever.
any sense. It doesn't make any sense. He's so right. Yeah, that was such a great analogy. What he used there is just, it sounds like there's a spirit of confusion as well. Like, duh, like you want to spend money, you pour money into classroom essentials and classroom experience and all that stuff, expenses. But what's the most expensive classroom expense? The teacher, the person that's spending the majority of their time with the child, should be paid way more. Let's get into the solution. So as I said before, God wanted me to share this message with my brothers and sisters. God highlighted Chicago. He didn't reveal the reason why, but like I said before, dreams are there to warn us. That's one of the functions of dreams. So we as believers can pray against it because we have that power to do so. Please get in your prayer bag. Take this whole thing up with God. Pray about this and be like, hey God, what's up? Like, do that, please. As far as like a solution, something that will actually solve the problem, because we didn't get to it in the video, but he mentions how much money has been spent in a lot of these programs or things like classroom expenses and whatnot, and they're in the millions, and it's like we can keep pouring in money and millions of dollars into the school system thinking that we're solving the problem, but we're not. We're just going around the mountain. We're just going around in circles like the Israelites in the wilderness. They just kept going around that mountain, and God told them, like, you're gonna have to go through it. But we're just going around and we're going around, and we're not hitting the problem at its head. We're not axing it at the root. The root issue is that it's a spiritual issue. It's the mind. It comes down to thinking. So I look at it like this. Let's zoom in and take one of the abusers, the teachers, out. We want to focus on him. Why is he doing what he's doing? Why is he looking at this student the way that he's looking, the sexual way, in a sexual manner? Why is he attracted? All of these things are mental. It's with the way of thinking, because sin is not just lying, cheat, stealing, all that stuff. Sin deals with the mind, your way of thinking. Is it of God or is it of Satan? I mean, we're born this way. We're born into sin. We're born of sin, and we are sinful by nature. But we have to take on the mind of Christ. We have to start taking on his ways, because our ways, our natural ways, are sinful. They're evil, because it's a spiritual battle, and it goes so in depth that you have to really have a mind change, or someone who's working on that, who's in their process of being saved. The solution is taking on the mind of Christ. It's bringing Yeshua HaMashiach back into the schools. Like, that means, in my mind, like, I'm not an expert, but for me to try to protect these kids, and I know that what the root issue is, I'm going to bring in pastors. Like that movie, The Call Center, or 911, the one with Halle Berry, where she was a 911 operator. They have like mental rooms, like break rooms. So that's what we need in school, especially if you're dealing with bad kids all day. You need to go and step in there, and it's a pastor there, or a teacher, or an evangelist, or a prayer warrior, or something that can pray over these teachers. But even going back before that, like that's in the school, but the hiring process of these teachers should be more than just a background check or a mental evaluation, because that's not going to solve it. It needs to be something that is long term, that's forever, that's perpetual. And if you have made a decision to follow Christ for life, that you have given your life over, then that means that change is eternal. That transformation is eternal. There's nothing that can negate that change. Like if you decided my life is for God, and I'm walking in my destiny, and I have a goal that I'm trying to look like him, then there's no turning back. Where if he's not a believer, and let's take this teacher as an example. If he's not a believer and he's just going through like mental therapy and like God's not involved at all, like, he's depending on his own flesh to get him through it. I was taught like in therapy class, like, if I see Alicia looking good, like I'm supposed to look this way and breathe 5 seconds and like all those things, yeah, it helps, but it doesn't solve the root of the issue, because he doesn't know that the truth, which is God wants you to take on his mind. You are born sinful. Your flesh wants to choose to do these things, and you want to look at Alicia, you want to have sex with her, but on the inside you don't want to do that because it's bad. The only way to help you not to axe that whole issue out and to not even look at Alicia that way is to take on the mind of Christ, because Christ wouldn't be thinking that way about Alicia. That's my daughter. If I have the mind of Christ, that's my daughter. I'm protective of her. So you need to get like that. That's the difference between a non-believer and a believer. So we need to hire teachers who are believers, who are Christians, who have made that decision to truly walk with God, because there's no turning back. They have their mind made up and their eyes are on God. So we don't have to worry if Mr. Smith is going to be looking at Alicia in that way, because he's actually axed that out. That mental mindset or mountain was taken and uprooted by God through like fasting, prayer, or whatever. Like, I think there's so many layers to this, but what I'm trying to say is that we need believers. We need Christians in these schools, because you will have less wickedness. You'll have less, way less, teachers molesting teachers, and not people just like, oh, I'm a Christian. No, truly walking with God. And I'll do a video on really what that means, like truly walking with God and knowing that you are here actually for a reason. We're not just here to entertain God and just use his guidebook, the Bible, why, to live on earth and that's it. Like, no, we are eternal beings. Our life goes on after this. We're eternal beings. Our soul is going to live on. So God has a plan for the eternity, like that life after this. So that's where our eyes need to be pointed. So once you realize that you are living for something, you're called to do something after this life, and that this is just temporary, like, your mind starts to elevate. You start to take on the mind of Christ. Yeah, and then you don't want to risk it all. Like, you really will transform by just renewing your mind and following God truly, not just being like, oh, I'm going to church, like being in religion. That's the difference. Like, true believers putting in like counselors, pastors, whatever on site for that Christian teacher who is about to knock little Johnny out because he done said something cray. He's like, look, Pastor, I need prayer, because I'm about 5 seconds for breaking this boy's neck, okay? And then Pastor Johnny be like, hey, Mr. Smith, calm down, let's pray. Or little Keisha came up in here with some spandex, and she looking real good. The booty look good, okay? It's all up on her thighs, and I want to smack it. And Pastor's like, look, let's pray. You know what I'm saying? Of course, he's going to report that, and then like the principal will have to deal with that. Like thank you for being honest. You're still struggling with lust and looking at a student sexually. I'm glad that you admitted that, but we're going to sit you down, okay? We're going to suspend you for a minute. You need to work on that. You and God need to do more fasting and prayer, because that kind, what is that, Matthew 17? That kind of spirit you got on you, it will only go away through fasting and prayer. So like, it needs to just become the church. The church needs to go all up in them schools and change it. And so, like I said earlier, it's not out of man's wisdom how we solve this. It's through God's wisdom, because God can solve this. So we can keep losing our money and pouring in money into this, but it's not going, like, we're going to continue to see this issue throughout generation, however long God gonna have us on this earth, until the millennial kingdom comes. We have to axe it at the root. So if y'all really want change and y'all really want our kids to be protected, we need to bring God back into the schools, period. All things are possible with God. Pray, but pray. All right, guys, I love you.